They didn't come with swords drawn. They came with silk, spices, and smiles. They came not as conquerors, but as traders. And yet, within a few decades, they were ruling the richest parts of India. How did that happen? This is one of the most cunning stories in history, not of invasion, but of manipulation, of treaties instead of tanks, of betrayal instead of battlefields. In the early 1600s, India was a land of wealth, culture, and power, ruled by the mighty Mughal Empire. At the same time, Europe was hungry for spices, silk, and trade. That hunger led to the creation of a company unlike any before, the British East India Company. But this was no ordinary company. It could sign treaties, build armies, and even rule over land, all under the name of business. Before the British set foot on Indian soil, the subcontinent was a land of wealth, power, and culture. At its heart stood the Mughal Empire, once the jewel of the East. Cities like Delhi, Agra, and Lahore glittered with marble palaces and bustling bazaars. Merchants sold silks, spices, and jewels, while poets recited verses in royal courts. But by the early 1700s, the Mughal Empire was in decline. Strong emperors like Akbar and Aurangzeb were gone. The throne was now held by rulers like Shah Alam II, whose authority barely reached beyond Delhi's walls. Provincial governors collected taxes for themselves, and the once mighty Mughal army struggled to control its own territories. This weakness gave rise to ambitious regional powers. The Marathas dominated the west with swift cavalry raids. In the south, the kingdoms of Mysore and Travancore built strong armies to defend their lands. In the east, Bengal's fertile fields and thriving markets made it one of the richest provinces in the world. But India was no longer united. Rivalries and shifting alliances made the political landscape unstable, perfect conditions for foreign traders to find an opening. The Portuguese had arrived first, controlling ports with their warships. They were followed by the Dutch, who expanded their spice trade, and then the French, who built forts and sought influence. And finally came the British. At first, they appeared as ordinary merchants, but the British East India Company, formed under a royal charter, was unlike any other. It had its own ships, soldiers, and authority to wage war or sign treaties. Their goal went beyond trade. They wanted control. The company began cautiously, asking local rulers for permission to set up trading posts, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. But every warehouse they built and every fort they garrisoned was a quiet step toward a greater plan. Behind polite diplomacy was an unspoken truth. The company had no intention of leaving. India, rich yet divided, was on the edge of a transformation it could not yet see. And in the shadows of its ports and palaces, the first moves of the British game had already begun. When the British East India Company first landed in India in the early 1600s, they were not the mighty rulers we picture today. They were merchants, one among many European competitors, searching for wealth in the East. The Portuguese had already carved out trading posts. The Dutch controlled spice routes. The French were building forts and forging alliances. But the company had something the others did not: a royal charter from the English crown, giving them extraordinary powers. They could sign treaties, wage wars, build forts, and command armies, all in the name of trade. Their early strategy was simple: establish secure bases along India's coastline. In 1611, they set up a factory at Masulipatam. In 1639, they built Fort St. George at Madras. Bombay came as part of a royal marriage dowry from Portugal. Calcutta grew around Fort William. These posts were more than warehouses. They were fortified outposts, guarded by cannons and garrisoned with troops. From here, British ships carried spices, cotton, and silk back to Europe. At first, Indian rulers saw them as useful partners. The Mughals welcomed silver from Britain and valued access to European goods. In Bengal, weavers created fine muslin and silk fabrics for export. In Gujarat, spices, saltpeter, and indigo flowed into company warehouses. But trade soon turned into something deeper. The British began to ask for and take more: lower customs duties, exclusive rights to certain ports, the ability to mint their own coins. Such privileges enriched the company, but bred suspicion among local rulers. By the late 1600s, the company had learned a key lesson. Wars were expensive, but politics could be profitable. They began playing Indian rulers against each other. They lent money to kings at crushing interest rates. They offered military support in return for trade concessions or land. And slowly, they began recruiting Indian soldiers, sepoys, training them in European warfare. By the mid-18th century, India was a land of opportunity. for those willing to take it. The Mughal Empire, once the supreme power, was now only a symbol. Shah Alam II, the emperor in Delhi, ruled in name but commanded little real authority. Across the land, regional kingdoms like the Marathas, the Nawabs of Bengal and Awadh, and the Kingdom of Mysore acted as independent states. In Bengal, the young Nawab Siraj-ud-Dawla had inherited one of the richest provinces in the world. His capital bustled with trade, and the fertile fields of Bengal fed millions. But wealth can attract both friends and enemies, and Siraj had many of the latter. Within his own court, there were nobles who despised him, merchants who feared losing privileges, and generals who doubted his leadership. The British East India Company had already established a strong presence in Calcutta. After Siraj captured Fort William in 1756, relations between the Nawab and the company collapsed. In London, this was seen as an insult to British power. In Calcutta, it was taken as an opportunity for a coup. The man chosen to execute this plan was Robert Clive. Clive understood that in India, political intrigue could be as decisive as any army. His mission was not just to defeat Siraj, it was to replace him with someone more cooperative. That someone was Mir Jafar, Siraj's commander-in-chief. Passed over for promotion, Mir Jafar had grievances that Clive could exploit. A secret agreement was struck. During the next major battle, Mir Jafar and his allies would not fight. In return, the company would make him the new Nawab. On June 23, 1757, the two armies met on the fields of Plassey. Siraj commanded around 50,000 men, the company just 3,000, but numbers would mean nothing. When the battle began, Mir Jafar's forces stood still, waiting. The British cannons fired in disciplined volleys, tearing through Siraj's lines. Confusion spread among the Nawab's troops. By mid-afternoon, the battle was effectively over. Siraj fled, but was soon captured and executed. The British victory at Plassey was not just a military success, it was a masterpiece of bribery, betrayal, and strategy. With Mir Jafar as Nawab, the company gained massive financial rewards, special trading privileges, and political dominance in Bengal. But puppet rulers rarely stay secure. Mir Jafar struggled to balance the demands of the company with the resentment of his own people. Eventually, the British replaced him with Mir Qasim, then brought Jafar back again when Qasim proved troublesome. It was clear now, the Nawab's throne was no longer decided in Bengal's palaces, but in the offices of the East India Company. In 1764, the company's ambitions were tested again at the Battle of Buxar. This time, they faced a united force, Mir Qasim of Bengal, Shuja-ud-Dawla of Awadh, and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II himself. The battle was fierce. Indian cavalry charged the British lines, muskets roared, and cannon smoke filled the air. But the company's troops were disciplined and better organized. By the end of the day, the Allied forces were in retreat. The victory at Buxar changed everything. In 1765, the Mughal emperor was forced to grant the company the Diwani, the right to collect taxes, in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Overnight, the British East India Company became one of the richest powers in Asia. The Mughal emperor, once ruler of an empire, was reduced to a pensioner living under British protection. His authority remained only in name. The real power lay in Calcutta. In less than a decade, the company had transformed from a trading organization into a political empire. And the most astonishing part? They had done it without launching a formal war of conquest. They had learned the truth about ruling India: control the money, and you control the land. After the victories at Plassey, 1757, and Buxar, 1764, the British East India Company no longer needed to fight for permission to operate in India. They owned it, at least in Bengal. But the way they ruled was unlike any government India had seen before. The company was still, officially, a private corporation. Its board of directors sat in London, its investors demanded profits, and its officers were trained in commerce, not kingship. Yet here it was, in control of vast lands and millions of people. To manage this strange new empire, the company developed what became known as the dual system of government in Bengal. Under this system, the Nawab remained the nominal ruler. His court handled ceremonial duties, religious affairs, and traditional administration, but the British collected the taxes, controlled the army, and decided all major policies. On paper, it looked like a partnership. In reality, it was a takeover. The Nawab wore the crown, but the company held the sword. The consequences were swift and devastating. The company's primary goal was profit, not the welfare of Bengal's people. Tax collection became ruthless. Farmers were pressured to grow cash crops like indigo and opium instead of food grains. Local industries, especially textiles, were strangled by British trade policies favoring imports from England. Then came disaster. In 1770, a massive famine swept through Bengal. Crop failures, combined with the company's unyielding tax demands, left millions starving. Estimates suggest that nearly one-third of Bengal's population perished. The famine exposed the brutal truth of company rule. This was not governance. It was exploitation on an industrial scale. But even as the people suffered, the company's wealth grew. Its profits from Bengal funded military expansion across India. From their base in Bengal, the British pushed outward. They secured strategic alliances through treaties, often after demonstrating overwhelming military superiority. In southern India, they clashed with the kingdom of Mysore, ruled by the formidable Hyder Ali, and later his son Tipu Sultan. Mysore was a powerful, modernized state, equipped with French-trained soldiers and advanced weaponry, including iron-cased rockets. The Anglo-Mysore Wars were brutal. While these wars belong to other part of our story, they began in this period of consolidation, as the British sought to break every regional power capable of challenging their dominance. In the West, the British faced the Marathas, a confederacy of warrior states that had once been the greatest threat to the Mughals. The Anglo-Maratha Wars would be another chapter in this relentless expansion. But the company's conquests were not achieved by military force alone. Diplomacy, or more accurately manipulation, remained one of their most powerful tools. They would offer protection to a ruler threatened by rivals, sending in their troops to defend him. In return, the ruler signed a subsidiary alliance. He agreed to host British troops, pay for their upkeep, and make no treaties with other powers without company approval. On the surface, it was an agreement between equals. In practice, it was the beginning of political slavery. The most famous architect of this system was Lord Wellesley, who as Governor-General in the late 18th century, perfected the art of using treaties to annex territory without firing a shot. By the 1790s, vast swathes of India were either under direct company control or bound to it through such alliances. The Nawab of Bengal, the Nizam of Hyderabad, the rulers of princely states, all were caught in the company's web. And yet, in London, questions were being asked. How had a private corporation become the ruler of a subcontinent? The answer lay in its ability to present conquest as commerce, and empire as partnership. The British government began to take more interest, passing laws to regulate the company and curb corruption. The Regulating Act of 1773 and the Pitt's India Act of 1784 gave the Crown more oversight. But in India, on the ground, nothing changed. The company still ruled, and its armies kept marching. By the early 1800s, the company had transformed from a trading enterprise into a full-fledged imperial power. Its armies were among the largest in the world. Its revenues surpassed those of some European nations, and its influence reached from the Himalayas to the southern seas. But beneath this apparent strength, there were cracks. The resentment of Indian rulers, the suffering of common people, and the arrogance of British officers were all building toward something. This chapter of our story ends with the company at the height of its power. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like, share it with others, and subscribe for more such videos. In part 2, we will see how that power was challenged by the resistance of Tipu Sultan and the Marathas, unrest among Indian soldiers, and the spark of 1857 that shook the empire they built.